Welcome everyone to the fourth session of webinar. I am Madhumita going to host today's session. Hope I am audible to everyone. Am I audible? Please somebody confirm me.
Yep, you
Yes,
are.
yes, you are.
So no more time waste. I'd like to request Mr. Abhishek Goswami to introduce Ms. Arpana Sarkar with us. Sir, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Madhumita. And I will do a small correction, which otherwise, if I don't do, Arpana will. It's Mrs. Arpana Sarkar. And she is a senior petrophysicist with Schlumberger. And I'm glad to say that this is July 2020. If I go back to July 1997, I've known her for 23 years now. And she is one of those rare people I can call a friend and I can turn to any times, apart from being a fantastic petrophysicist with a lot of domain knowledge, which you will see in a moment around rock physics, geomechanics evaluation, exploration studies. She is quite a voracious writer. She writes up, presents papers in SPE, SPWLA, and she also has a patent, which you will hopefully in her talk get to find more about in the field of CBM. She's a certified Next coach, so you are in great hands. Over to you, Arpana. Hope you have a great time.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhishek. Should I start then now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. So let me go through the presentation. So I think Abhishek has already given a big introduction to myself. So I haven't really created any introduction for me. But when I started Schlumberger, I started as a log analyst. I had a geophysics role before Schlumberger, and then I developed as a borehole geologist, borehole geophysics, a small instinct of that. Then I started again main domain petrophysics. Then I started working on field development studies, field exploration studies, and that included shale gas, coal bed methane, clastic, carbonate, volcanic environment. And currently, I'm working on an exploration project, which means that the field where there is almost everything is unknown. So, how do we really use petrophysics? And it is a very nice project and nice concept that you have to integrate everything. So when we say petrophysics is actually not anything just related to that sample of the rock or the log of the rock. It is actually looking at the multi-domain scenarios and how does this fit in that whole ENP cycle, and how does it influence, right? So one big lesson is that whichever segment, whichever section that you are really working on, if you understand where your role is fitting in, you would be understanding that how it is going to influence your interpretation. So next I am going to show that how I look at in the role of multi-well evaluation, what is the role of logs. So one is the conceptual geology. So I think this is already, I've seen this slide on the day one. And conceptual geology means when that includes like, okay, concept of basins, resource rock, how they're extending. And these are all derived by seismic data. If the seismic data is not there, there is the old wells which has been drilled and looking at their extent. So those wells play a role, which are probably drilled in 30s or 50s or 80s, depending on the current scenario of exploration. Then when it comes to the seismic velocity model building, so starting from the well to seismic tie. So when you have seismic data, it is it is all in time domain, right? So when you are need to know that where does your target depth exist, they have to come down in the depth domain, and doing that scenario, that is the one very critical part that is taken care of is the well to seismic tie, which often requires sonic data, density data, right? Because you are dealing with velocity domain and acoustic impedance domain. Then comes to the well correlation. Now, what well correlation means that if you have already drilled wells, then you would like to see how those formations are extending. What is the extension of those formation? What are the thickness of each layer of this formation? So that is a place where you define your tops and markers. But remember to provide the inputs that where these layers are changing, that requires a gamma ray, and sometimes it requires even more than that, like how the densities are behaving, how the special thorium is behaving, or how pyrite are behaving. So these are the factors that is required to, understanding of your correlation of wells, creating a bigger model. Then comes the petrophysical evaluation, which I would say it is, this is in sequence, because then you would do the evaluation and you would know how much is your porosity, permeability, saturation, etc. And these are the inputs that is required for your phases modeling. And when you have the phases and you have this property that is integrated, that is called geomodeling, right? So geomodeling is another big domain, because that gives you a picture of how the subsurface looks like and how those properties are distributing. So when you get an idea of how the structure look like, what are the properties associated with the structure, that enables you to either decide it as a new exploration well or appraisal well, or decide on, when if you are in development stage, what kind of development scenario that you will include. Then the inputs of well is again hydrocarbon mapping and oil water contact mapping. So of course, when you look at multi-well, you look at the well correlation, you would identify the uh, cutoff, right? You will know where the hydrocarbon is, where is the water comes out, and that gives you a bigger scenario that you can see from a small cartoon here. So a small cartoon, and when you see a multi-well analysis, you will see where the gas comes, where the oil comes, and where the water comes. And then these data, these wells play a big role in geomechanics. And I think there is already a session on geomechanics, so I would not really much cover here. But to decide what is the wellbore stability, to decide how the perforations are going to perform, or to decide that when you have a new wells, what are the risks that is associated to, so that you don't have a gas cake, like we call it in industry is no drilling surprises, right? So, and then one more big role that will be covered by Dr. Shah here is the rock physics modeling. So it includes porosity that is computed from petrophysics. It includes the phases distribution that is computed from petrophysics and the geomodeling. And that it decide is what it decide. It decide how the porosities are related in a caustic domain, which is more seen by the seismic. And then the relationships are generated to get maximum answers from seismic, especially when you are in exploration or in the planning of the development phase. And when these rock physics modeling are prepared to create the seismic inversion, and you can visualize more. Last but not I would not say it's not a last, it's a cycle, but one of the biggest input that log analysis provide is the input to source and the resource and the reserve estimation. What does it mean? So resource means it will decide to see that if you have a rock volume, what are the percentage of hydrocarbon, what is the thick net to gross ratio, what is the average porosity, and when if you have decided, okay, these are my net to gross area, okay, these are my zones with the target, how much is the reserve? And this is one of the founding block of any exploration studies, that they decide, okay, now we can go ahead with the, one second, I'm keeping the time on. So that will decide on how the reserve, that will decide all your field development plan, all your exploration and appraisal plan. Remember, this is one of the biggest input, the resource and reserve estimation is biggest input, because that is where the operators have all their investment planned, right? So this is more of an introduction. Now I'll take you to petrophysics. So what is petrophysics? So petrophysics is the study of rock physics, rock properties, but in sense of how you can relate in terms of physics, which means that you look at the rock, but you want to compute their property using the methods which are using that energy. You are using a physics here, right? So we will discuss how these rock properties are being computed, what are the limitations, what are the uncertainties, but moreover, what are the applications and how it is being so popular. The petrophysics is so popular and it is being so utilized in any phase of the exploration and production case. So this term was coined by Archie, and I am sure those who have already gone through the first or second semester of well log analysis have already read about it. But I would like to emphasize that it has to be somewhere between. It has to be somewhere from geology and to link the geology to the reservoir engineers. So reservoir engineers like to get the numbers, and geologists want to honor. The geologists would like petrophysicists to honor their all the geological concept, all their geological mineral information, all their deposition setting, and reservoir engineers would like us to provide inputs that will make their model correct so that they know how much they are going to produce for how many years. So it is somewhere between, right? So what are the petrophysical, why we are doing? So grossly, how much hydrocarbon in this well, where it is, and what are the, if there is a communication, right? What are the extent of the reservoir? How will it produce? These answers are actually given by petrophysics domain. So first property that you would generally know what is the petrophysics. Generally, we just have 4 terms that is being used, but there is much more insight on computing each of the property. So first property that is very key is the porosity. How much fluid the rock has, which means that fluid includes hydrocarbon, fluid includes your water. And you would always like to target the hydrocarbon production. And you would also like to see, even if porosity exists, is it allowing the fluid to flow? We will define porosity in the coming slide. Then comes to saturation. So if there are fluids, how much is water and how much is hydrocarbon? It is important to know water because you don't want to produce water. You want to know where the hydrocarbon is. Lithology, it is what kind of environment you are dealing with. You are dealing with, mostly we deal with the sedimentary rock, but we also sometimes deal with the volcanic. We deal with basements, which are mostly, initial stage. So it is very important that we need to know where the hydrocarbons stored. What are this lithology? What are the type of clays are there? What are the type of minerals are there? If you produce, how they are going to interfere. So that's very critical. And permeability. So how if you have hydrocarbons, so how can we produce? Can we just directly produce it? Or do we need to break the formation? So these properties are defined by the petrophysical analysis. So as we discussed, these properties, I will take you through the properties in this sequence, lithology, porosity, saturation, permeability. And we will discuss in the coming slide what are the tools that is used to identify these properties, right? So I will start with lithology, and the tool that is used generally is gamma ray, SP, spectroscopy. Density and sonic are generally used for porosity. Saturation is from resistivity. NMR is from giving you permeability and also resistivity. But same time, these data are not individually an output. We need to calibrate it. And that's where the role of a core data is very important. So whenever we are computing, because you're using a physics, it's a derived property. So what we do is we also look at the core and we try to see how these data fit with the core data. And that's a calibration point. So I will take you to various few slides before I go to this property. So this is the first electrical downhole log in 1927. And this was resistivity measurement, and it's this electrical survey. And if you look at the next slide, that includes that, as a physics, why do we define it as physics? Because what we are measuring in all these domains is energy. When we are saying gamma ray, when we are saying density, or when we are saying resistivity, actually we are measuring energy in different domains to compute the petrophysical property. So for example, here I will not go through all, but just for your information here, like acoustic energy, that gives me P and shear, P wave and shear wave. We are computing, say, electrical energy, that gives me resistivity, or electromagnetic, that also gives the resistivity. Nuclear energies and their different phases of nuclear energy gives gamma ray, neutron density. So in essence, we are computing actually energy, and we are deriving these properties from energy and this principle of energy to a rock property. And from 1927 example that I gave you from Wellbore, the development of tools has been immense, right? And few things I would like to highlight from this slide is the resistivity tool, which is which was initially used, right? That where if there was resistivity, if there was hydrocarbon, resistivity would increase. But that was not sufficient, right? And you don't know, resistivity can increase if you have a formation which is very tight. So it start needing the more and more and more information, because as we are coming out from 1950s world to 2020 world, there is no any easy oil, and it requires more characterization to find out what is not easy, right? So few things, maybe you have already read it. So like you can see, first SP log was 1931. First sonic log was actually 1957. First density log was actually in 1960, right? And you can see there was a development of imaging, like 1985, these started giving the images of the rock. And then there is a lot of development on how the data is being logged, like logging while drilling. So they started using that. The wireline was the traditional, which means that your hole is already drilled, and you send your tool with a wire, and you start recording data in every stage. Logging while drilling is that you have a drill bit in front and you start drilling, and the same time you take care of all the shocks and drill cutting and everything, but you still save your tools from those the shocks or those interference, but still keep on measuring. So that required a lot of improvement of how the tools are to be designed, and to ensure that we can collect the data, and that will reduce the effect of any borehole effects. So that will have a reduction. So that's why the logging while drilling on recent time is more popular, and wireline services are being used for specific reasons. So let's start with the lithology, right? What do you mean by lithology? So I would start with rock. When I'm taking care of only sedimentary rock in this slide. So when you have rock, we define it grossly. Okay, we have clastic or we have carbonate. But when we say clastic, again we are still in the domain of a rock. And what we can then define as lithology, okay, we have sand or shale. But that's not end here. We cannot characterize sand from the log. We have to characterize the sand or shale in detail by understanding what sand composed of, right? So sand can be composed of quartz, silica as a major mineral. It can have a mica, it can have feldspar, it can have a calcite also, which is in form of cementation. The more you understand about the rock, you would know the sand is not quartz. Sand is actually a composition, it's a mix of all these minerals that define the lithology as sand. Similarly, shale, when you define shale, it is not necessarily, it includes the clay. Clay is which is the minerals. Shale means it can have part of quartz, the clays, it can have calcite, it can have pyrite. So it is very complex. Similarly, in carbonate, when we say carbonate, it doesn't mean limestone. It means the limestone, it means dolomite, it means siderite, and it defines also the type of clays. It can have a percentage of clay, but we still define it carbonate because the percentage of other input, other minerals are less, right? And the mudstone is the other side, which is more shaly in the carbonate domain, but your percentage of these clay, elite, the like elite or this chloride, these are the terms I'm sure you have seen it in the first or second semester of studies, this mineral introduction when it was given to you. So these minerals are actually playing the role to make it more shaly, but only defining elite will not define shale, or same time defining shale will not define how much elite percentage is. So how do you get this data? You get this information from mudlogs. So mudlog and cutting example is when you are drilling a well, your bits are bringing the chips, the cuttings to the surface, and a geologist at the well site start analyzing it, and he knows, he defines the geology. The gross lithology. Then if those you have taken a core or even the cutting sample, they can do the X-ray diffraction, and that defines your what is called what are the type of main minerals are. So what you can see is that the blue is calcite, the yellow is quartz, the brown is the total clay that includes smectite and elite, and then the dark blue that you can see here is the dolomite. You can also know these data information if they have done the sedimentology report from the core or the thin section. That gives you an idea of how the rocks are, right? So nevertheless, these information actually is coming from the ideal source would be the core, but the core you cannot take it to the whole study level. What you need to know that how these informations, when we are deriving from the log domain, how we are taking it to the modeling domain. Sorry. Right. Okay. So let's see now lithology evaluation from log. Okay. So you might have heard that gamma ray, SP, PEF spectroscopies are being used for identifying reservoir and non-reservoir. Right. These are two examples when I have plotted gamma ray and SP. Right. What do you see here? That in one plot you have gamma ray and SP correlating, right? So whenever there is a shale, gamma ray is giving high, which is shale. The SP is also giving positive. So this is one scenario when the gamma ray can be used to identify. So when you have high gamma ray, we generally call it shale. We will go to the equation next. So what you do is that, okay, this is my maximum gamma ray, so that's maximum percentage of shale rock. And then this is say minimum gamma ray, this is my sand rock. And similarly, the SP is deflecting in similar way. Not the same way, but similar way. That gives a very good confidence. Okay, this is definitely a clean formation and this is definitely shale formation. But the other scenario that you see is gamma ray is high, but the SP is deflecting in negative. This is because an environment where your mud resistivity and the formation water resistivities are acting totally two different way, right? So I will take you to that slide to why the SP behaves in two different scenario. There is a slide, I have put it later. So when you see a gamma ray, how do we compute volume of shale? So what you do is you assume, okay, this is my cleanest rock, and this is the high maximum shale rock, and that defines my minimum and maximum. And this is, say, for example, that's your measurement. This simple equation will define how much is the volume of shale. But again, remember, this is going to be defined how the gamma ray are behaving. It's not necessarily that gamma ray is always behaving because of shale. It can be behaving because of the minerals like micas, or it is maybe behaving because you have carbonate, which has high uranium. So these are uncertainty that you will discuss, but that's how simply we are computing. Similarly, for SP, you measure what is maximum for shale, what is the minimum for sand, and you use a simple equation. So SP, when you look at SP, it is how we are using SP. We are using it as a porosity and permeability indicator. And what is SP? SP is actually not really big. It's very simple concept. It's simple concept is when you have a permeable rock and when you have adjoining rock, there is an ionic exchange that happens. And this factor of ionic exchange is based on the mud resistivity and the formation water resistivity. If there is a big contrast that you would be able to see when you are coming from shale to sand, right? If you do not have a contrast between this, which can happen in freshwater environment, especially when you go to Assam, there is a formation called Tipam sand, and I'm sure you have heard of it. And if you have not, please read it. It's ideally highly recommend that read. So Tipam sand, you cannot use SP for gamma ray for the sand and shale identification because formation water resistivity is generally the river water. Sorry, it's like 1,000 ppm, and the well they are drilling is almost a river water. So you cannot get a contrast. Also, nowadays, because most of the wells are being drilled by oil-based mud, you cannot really use the SP. So recently, of recent, we are not using SP a lot in the industry. It is good for, I would say, like before 80s, SP was very useful tool because most of the wells were drilled by the using oil-based mud, water-based mud, and where you can get a conflict. But the water-based mud caused other problems, like the wells could caved because the water was connecting with what do you call it? It was connecting with the clays, and when you are connecting clays, the clay would swell. So and then the well will collapse. So what they developed is the oil-based mud in the industry later, and wells are more and more wells are drilled with oil-based mud. This provides the stability in the wells, which is more important because the most investment that goes compared to logging a well is not that expensive compared to the drilling a well and keeping the well alive for future production. So what they do is they use oil-based mud. So SP is nowadays is not much used. So as I discussed in the last slide, the SP and gamma ray that you are seeing here, this is one scenario when the mud resistivity was much lower than uh, the formation water resistivity. So your wells are drilled with very high salinity. And this is a scenario when the formation water resistivity was higher than the mud resistivity. So which is generally not seen. This is very not common, but this is what is common. But again, as I said, in the recent wells, you may not find successful SP because the wells are drilled in OBM. Then comes gamma ray. So gamma ray is very simple, people always use, and it's a very nice correlating curve. It gives the property of the position. It helps you identifying your unconformity. It identifies your shale. It identifies your bed boundaries are, and it is used for shale indicator. So what is gamma ray? Gamma ray is actually again, you're measuring an energy. You have a source, and at one stage, when these pulses are sent to the rock, the source, it is observed. The energy is observed by the elements, and these elements start releasing the gamma energy. Going back to the proton theory, which I'm not taking you to in that detail. So from the total gamma ray, the next stage that happen is providing the natural gamma ray spectroscopy. What it means that they could differentiate the energy where each element like potassium, thorium, and uranium can exist. So why we have to identify potassium, uranium, and thorium is those clays are more sensitive to potassium and thorium compared to the uranium. So earlier we were computing only one energy, and later it was possible to differentiate these energy in different peaks, right? We can go through in next presentation next time if you are not very clear how gamma ray is computing these energies. But what we are trying to say is if you have thorium, potassium, uranium, we have industry has generated this cross plots that helps you identifying the type of clay. Like so elite will have a high potassium and low thorium, whereas kaolinite will have high thorium but low potassium. This is an example I prepared for this presentation. In this case, you have gamma ray in the y-axis and x-axis is uranium. You can see here that as your uranium is increasing, your gamma is increasing. And where could that happen? It happened mostly in carbonate, because uranium, or it can happen with the unconventional shale gas, which is called hot gamma, right? They call hot shales. Hot shales means where you have a high uranium content. So in this scenario, this is not an indicator of clay. So this cannot indicate your shale. If you have high gamma, it is not indicating how much shale is it. So these are the limitation of using gamma ray from in just on a standalone. So then what happened there is, in the same gamma domain, they developed another scenario of spectroscopy. So that gives us that this energy is in the capture domain. So it is again, after capturing the source data, the energy is being released, and after a lot of analysis, lot of study, they were able to actually identify peaks of each element. So which I mean that element is silicon, calcium, iron. And isn't it great, right? Because what we were trying to do is, how from the physics, we would like to see how much is the quartz, and how do we associate this quartz? We associate this quartz with silica. So if we have a idea of silica, and if I have an idea of how much is aluminum, which is associated with the clay, we will have a much better picture. So this snapshot that I kept is that you have elemental weight, and then what you do is, from elemental weight, you define your rock. So they developed an empirical relationship. Okay, this much percentage of silicon, this much percentage of aluminum can combine and give me a type of clays. This example that I have kept is because there is no more simple rock, right? This is one of the example of this, that we do not have a simple rock. We do not evaluate silica or elite. We are actually evaluating a much more complex rock. And you see here, this has a clay, which is elitic, and quartz, some mica, some feldspar, then you have calcite, then you have dolomite. This small dotted area that if you can see, this is pyrite. When you see, and these data is being validated by the core data, which from XRD. So what it enabled us to solve for complex mineralogy. If I really had no clue of how these calcite percentage are changing from this formation to this formation, the density, which is not plotted here, actually remained the same when it went from this section to this section, because the percentage of each element were changing, which actually caused the density to remain fixed. And also the gamma ray, because you can see that feldspars and are also there in the sand, right? So so what we are trying to say here, that this is great tool that helped, and you can read this in a public domain. This example I took it from Google actually. So next is porosity. Now, what is porosity? It's really a complex definition that I am showing here. But in simple nutshell, when we are visualizing porosity, we are actually the porosity. This is example of a thin section. These whites are the grains, and these blues are the porous section. And what we are trying to do from petrophysically, we are trying to look at in the physics domain. We are saying, okay, this is the sample which has only fluid, and this was the solid. One solid, this is the fluid part, and that defines the porosity, right? But this is not the scenario, but we are trying to solve this scenario to represent this scenario, right? So what is the porosity now? The porosity is nothing but the pore volume divided by the bulk volume. So this is the total bulk, and this how much is the pore part of it. But this is not simple when you take it in the industry level. There are multiple definitions of porosity that exist. First is the total porosity. So total porosity means, of course, that every percentage of clay associated water, the capillary water, the interconnected porosity, or the isolated like bugs, they all form the part of porosity. But how much porosity can we define? So generally, we are able to define total porosity ideally from the NMR, but then next comes the density tool that we will discuss, and we will discuss about limitation and the application of each of the tool. Next slide. So what you see here is generally the definition that generally being used by the industry is total and effective porosity. And we define the effective porosity is any interconnected pores, but they are not which are going to help in the production of the fluid, is the one which is called effective porosity. But what we generally can measure is the effective porosity also can include the irreducible, because the tools are not able to differentiate it quite well. So effective porosity ideally comes from when you really have NMR data, right? So I will go through the quickly on the how the density is being used. So density is a tool which defines the porosity, and it has a method that the tool again have a gamma ray source, and it is able to detect the electronic density, and essentially that is converted to the bulk density. The limitation of this, as you can see from the tool design, it is actually skidding near on the top of the borehole. What does it mean? That if you have a hole which is regauze, these detectors will get affected, and it will see different formations at different time if the hole is not uniform. So it sees it badly. But let's not look at the limitation. Let's look at the application, how we are computing porosity from density. So what assumption it is taking is we have a rock, so we define it as matrix, and then we have a fluid. We define it as a say water, or it can have effect of the mud. But so the rock, bulk rock, can be represented as porosity multiplied by the fluid density, and the density of the the minerals that create your framework multiplied with the effective porosity. So I'll take you an example that shows that how the density is being used for porosity. You can see here from this that it is very dependent on the matrix density. That is shown here. If I don't know what lithology is, and if I use the limestone, which is 2.71, you can see the porosity that is computed is the blue one, right? And if you think it is a sand, and if you use an ideal parameter of 2.65, you will see the brown color, and you can see how much porosity it is. And even a 3% of porosity change in your resource or reserve estimation can actually influence your volumetrics of the rock that helps you decide your future of your investment. It is enormous. So it is very important that we compute the right porosity from the tool. So when you look at here, and if I have multi-mineral analysis, that gives me an idea of how much really the sand includes the other minerals are. I compute a porosity here, and you can see this porosity that I have computed, the black one, is much less than both of the cases. Now, why it is so? So first is that this density is ideally, earlier we were only using think about this as a clastic, only using quartz. But this formation is actually having hydrocarbon. And what hydrocarbon does is, if you have a less hydrocarbon will reduce the density of the rock. And when using this method, it is assuming that we are using water as a fluid, right? So when I was using a simple relation, considering water as fluid and matrix as 2.65, I was computing high porosity. As soon as your lower part increases or reduces, your porosity will influence. So I have multi-mineral analysis that helps me identifying the porosity, which is much lower if I use simple quartz. And how do I validate even my model? Further is to add the NMR data, NMR, which we'll discuss in the last slide. That it helps. You can see that the multi-mineral analysis correlates much better with the NMR data, and that gives a confidence on the analysis. You can see in few cases that it is not matching, and because the domains are different. So what is our best thing is to integrate as much as data you have to come to the same solution, so that can be forwarded to the geologists and the reservoir engineers with the more confidence to make their decision. It is also used for TOC computation, and I'm not going to take it through why and how the method is, but this you can see here that a smoker equation, it includes the rho v. Cayley sand computation, this is an example where the density and neutron in combination can help you identify Cayley sand. In the left, you have gamma ray, and this is neutron and density. What I'm presenting here is this pink, where the gamma was showing, volume of shale from gamma was showing very high gamma, and it was showing it to be as a shale. And it is so because this well has a very high percentage of feldspar. When you have high percentage of feldspar, gamma ray will not really show an indicator of clean and sand and shale formation, right? So it will not identify which is clean and which is not clean. So that's where the neutron density separation, you can see here in the green area, that helps identifying sand and shale. Nowadays, we use the density data in the logging while drilling, and it gives an imaging. It can help you identifying the whole image of the rock. So dependency of mineral is the only thing, but still, this is one of the tools that is very practically used for the porosity computation. Next, I'll take you to the neutron. And this is neutron. What we are computing, actually, it is more of identification. I would not call neutron porosity as a porosity of rock. It is more an identification of the rock. And why I'm saying so, because if you take an example here, the same example, you can see the neutron in the clay is increasing, right? So does it mean that we have porosity, this much high porosity? It is not, because we have already seen that actually it has very low total porosity. It is more of an indicator of the type of clays, right? You can see here some table I have prepared for this live presentation. So what we are doing is we are using neutron and density as a cross plot, which is more ideal, and identify in how they are defined shale and sand. And there are multiple cross plot that exist that you can use, and you can get back to me anytime if you really do not understand this cross plot. Then comes the right porosity that is just established, is actually used from the NMR. I really like this tool, but unfortunately we are not running NMR in every well. But what it does, it is able to identify the total porosity. It is not looking at minerals. It's only looking at the pores. It is only looking at the big pores or the small pores. When you see a big pore, you will see your decay going slow. And this slow decay is inverted to a later time, right? Because it took longer to define the time. If you have a small pore like shales, which you have a more of a surface area, which is allowing this hydrogen proton to act fast, and this hydrogen or the proton, they decay faster because they are colliding faster. That will be defined as a faster decay and the earlier. That's why it has earlier T2. I'm trying to just put in a very simple method that it is not looking at minerals. It's looking at the total porosity. This is an example of the T2 distribution, how it looks like. So of course, this you can see is a very early T2. You cannot see actually because it decays so fast. This is some kind of silt formation, and that's why you see T2 decay very fast. And this is a place where it is very clean, and that's why you have a late T2. So how it is being used? It is used for total porosity. It is being used for the even permeability, which I have on slide. Then comes the sonic. Also sonic, because you remember sonic is developed before the density. So sonic started being used for the seismic, but at the same time sonic was also used in computing porosity. And again, the simple concept that what you are measuring as a log is a percentage of effect of fluid, and it is percentage of fluid effect of matrix. And this is what you are defining as a porosity. And here I am taking you to a small review of how the sonic tool has evolved, because we are geophysicists, and geophysicists need to see how the sonic is going to use and how we are going to use in our seismic domain, right? That's a more practical approach of using the sonic. Generally, nowadays, sonic is not used for porosity. Only if you're in an exploration scenario when you do not have anything but gamma ray and DT, which is most of the cases. If I am given an exploration studies, I get wells with gamma ray and DT or only SP and resistivity. In those scenarios, you have to look at these analysis in much detail and very careful. But you need to know how these theories are. Theory remains the same and how they are being used for computing your rock properties. So in 1950s, when the tool was developed, it has one receiver, one transmitter. But if you had a hole which is bad, it would not really honor that. So they start introducing more receivers. Then in later, they start introducing further more receivers. What it did is it look at the the acoustic velocity and how the waveform is coming back to the receiver in this format. So what you see here is these are the receiver signal, as you can see. And when you look at this receiver signal, what they could do is they could look at where the maximum coherency exists. And this maximum coherency is plotted in a slowness versus time projection at one depth. And this depth is this is one depth, and the same thing happens in every 6-inch or every samples, whatever is defined by the service companies. You create a log, and that gives you a confidence on compressional and shear data. Now, the current tool that we talk about is the Sonic Scanner or WebSonic, different depending on different service provider, or Schlumberger, Baker, Halliburton. They all have this method. So because we are able to develop the technology, we are able to bring the theory in reality. It takes a lot of effort to bring the theory to reality that you can see here. Even though they understood the fact, but development of Sonic Scanner or the X-Wave is only after 2010. So again, if you are computing porosity here, the complex mineral or the compaction or the fluid slowness can play a role of not giving you a right scenario. But nevertheless, I would use the sonic data for rock physics and geomechanics, which will be discussed in this session later by Partha and Dr. Shah. Saturation. Now next is saturation. So when you look at saturation, what does it mean? Saturation means that we have a matrix. We have certain percentage of oil and certain percentage of water. So how much is the oil is available in this rock is the saturation of oil, right? But how do we define in a domain? So if this is a rock which is only filled with water, okay, this resistivity, what we will call is RW. Again, but when we include matrix, there is a lot of the grains, which here I'm not even talking about the clay. Here only the grains. Then your resistivity that you are computing is RO. So what initially RT could identify is how the relationship of RW by RT can give me saturation. But then that was not the easy thing that happens, because remember, the rock is not quartz or calcite, it is a sand which includes clay. So when you had clay, the clay exists in different scenario. And look, when the experiments start after, especially in 80s, there were a lot of experiments. They started developing how the clay, if they are structural clay or they are dispersed clay or laminated clay, how they are going to affect the saturation computation. And you can see in the same example, you can see that the Archie and Indonesian equation, which I used, is showing similar in the sand, but dual water was giving me a different saturation. And Indonesian is computing the saturation even in zones which is not being seen by Archie. So these are the multiple scenarios that have been used, and there is no straight one answer which will fit why. You have to do a thorough analysis, understanding the images, try to look at what kind of clay is it, how this clay can exist, whether they will exist as clay or whether it will exist as layer or it will exist as dispersed. So I'll take you one slide on resistivity measurement that is enabler of computing saturation. So the two tools or the two principle that exist is lateral log principle and induction principle. One is direct measurement of the resistivity from voltage, and another one is electromagnetic method. And where they are used based on where so they are used based on the whether resistivity of mud or resistivity of rock is different. So if you are running in oil-based mud, you cannot use the direct voltage measurement. You have to go through the electromagnetic method, which is the induction method. So here what I'm trying to show an example of a rock. This example again you can find in a public domain. This is from RT scanner brochure. So this is a shaly sand environment, right? As I said, we are not looking at quartz or limestone. And so what happened, like look at the gamma ray, and they are plotted in a way that they are giving me clean to shale environment, right? Neutron density shows a crossover, which is very nice. But you see, there is a big girl in neutron density cross plot, which means that it's showing me indicator of clean to non-clean formation. But look at the resistivity, the induction resistivity. It's a flat curve. It is showing a very less effect. But so what happened is that when you compute saturation using this blue curve, this is the blue saturation that you will get it as an output. So what they found, because you are drilling mostly with oil-based mud, we found out that the induction concept is more sensitive to clay, and it does not tend to give you the right resistivity of the sand. It is most influenced by the rock, by the clay in the rock. So they developed a tool called RT scanner, and that looks at the 3-dimension, and which you can see in this picture. And then they model this 3-dimension to identify what is the vertical resistivity and what is the horizontal resistivity. And when they look at this example where the vertical resistivity was much, much higher than what the tool was computing. So the green one was the actual resistivity, because this was a thin bedded laminated sand, and the induction resistivity could not measure alone. Only when we included the anisotropy in the concept, it gives an idea of how much is the saturation of the rock. Remember, if I use this one, I would have just find out my net pay only limited to the blue section out of this sand, which is like, say, if it is in feet, it is, say, this example of 100 feet. I would have just say my net to gross ratio is only 10 feet, which means only 10%. But when I look at the laminated sand environment, it is actually more than 70-80% of the rock has hydrocarbon. So this is a very big problem solving of the current scenarios, because that will define what is the volume of the rock that we are going to explore or plan our development on. Then comes the permeability. Now, how do we compute permeability? It's actually, the permeability is a very theory, and we have to define it from the principle of the logs, right? So this is one example I'm bringing from NMR, that same porosity can have different permeability. So you look at here, the rock has 20% porosity, and this is the rock which has same porosity, 19.5%, I mean same. And you look at the permeability, it's 7% and it is 280, right? Why? Because this permeability is not defined directly only by the porosity, but the sorting of the rock, the presence of clay in different scenario, or the type of clay in the rock. So NMR can do one very good thing is looking at, as I said, looking at the relaxation or the late T2s, it can say, okay, actually we have a higher permeability compared to this section. So what it does, it identify a T2 cutoff and look at the function of free fluid to bound fluid to define permeability. The similar ideal scenario that we use in industry is the permeability if I can get it from core. You may not get it from core, but it is a very ideal thing to have it. And you can see the type of the rock, right? Type of the sorting or the type of the rock based on similar porosity. You can see in the similar porosity, you can have one permeability, another permeability, another permeability. So these are depends on the pore size, sorting, the type of clays existing. And we generally use the core transform to use from porosity to permeability transform and use it. So if you have your phases well defined, you can do these scenarios. Then the well bore imager, I think, this is only objective I wanted to show that this has a very high resolution. In the laminated environment, this image helps you to identify the type of clay, the clay presence, whether it is laminated or the dispersed. Also, this is a scenario of laminated where the induction tool will actually fail to give you right resistivity. So you need to know that you have to include the anisotropy in the model. So I'm coming to the last slide. I think I almost took whole time in this discussion. So this one example, okay? So what we are trying to present here, we always look at, whenever we look at the analysis, we don't look at only one log. It has to look everything. And because one log can be, because it's all about the principle. If you have uranium, you cannot use gamma ray. If you have feldspar in your sand, you cannot use gamma ray. Neutron density you can use for volume of shale, but if you have a fluid in gas in your rock, again, you cannot use neutron density, right? So an example here. So what we are plotting here is the gamma ray, total gamma ray green, HSGR, and SCGR. What SCGR means, only looking at thorium and potassium. So this difference is actually giving you idea of uranium. Luckily, this plastic, you do not have a problem of that's mostly they are correlating well. In carbonate, it will be a different scenario. Then the resistivity, and you can see the resistivity coming from induction. And from this resistivity, the image has been created because we have multiple resistivity, and we can see which resistivity, shallow resistivity is, looking at only, shallow measurement, but the deep is actually giving me a deeper information. Then you have, let me take you to the sonic, right? So it is giving a scenario of, okay, if this formation does really have a fluid effect going to show the fluid effect in the rock, or is it really a clean sand, but it does not have, it is actually a tight. So when you look at the ECS data or the spectroscopy data, you can see it's actually a tight formation rather than, looking at some porosity, expecting some porosity. Then comes, this is a complex petrophysical evaluation, which includes all type of minerals as a type variation of the clay. You can see some kaolinite, some illite, some mica, calcite. And then you do a perfect evaluation, and then only you can expect a good match from the core. If you do not really if you have not honored this data, you may not get a good match. And this is an example which is not really giving a very ideal scenario, but these are the more reality, because you do not have an easy oil, as I said, right? Most of the oil that we are really dealing with, thin oil, laminated formation, thin sands. So that requires more and more integration of and understanding of the principle of these tools. So one example of the shales, maybe I thought maybe you will be curious. When you say shales, shale gas or shale oil, do we really look at the shale as a shale? But actually, the reality is these shale names, if you have studied before, they actually do not have a lot of clay content. You can see the clay percentage is low. They are called shale because it has a source rock defined by the presence of kerogen. This purple is defining the kerogen. And you can see how complex each of these shale gas reservoirs are, right? They are source rock, but we call it reservoir because we are going to produce from there. And this cannot be solved only by gamma ray or only by neutron density. But again, in very exploration scenario, we have to use the same data, those basic data. But understanding the limitation and understanding its validation in a larger scenario, we can solve, the multi-domain. We can help the multi-domain studies. So I think with that, I end my presentation. I think I hope it was useful.